Hello, folks. Welcome to another Hoppy Hour with Bob and Jimmy. I'm Jimmy. Bob is not here. He's out on assignment. He's up in Virginia, where we just recorded an interview with Andy Covert, who is the head brewmaster of Evening Shade Brewery. Evening Shade Brewery is a home brewers association or group that I was a part of when I lived in Virginia. So, roll it.
Andy, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Andy Covert?
So I live in Centerville, Virginia, Northern Virginia, outside of D.C. I live with my wife, Wendy. Been married for 33 years. I've got two grown sons, one Dylan and his wife, Kimmy, that live in the area. And our younger son lives down in Wilmington, North Carolina, with in the same area as you and your colleague, Jimmy. I started homebrewing in the mid-'90s. When I was still in the Navy. I came into my second tour of duty in Southern California, and a friend of mine, a squadron mate, introduced me to the hobby. And, there was a local homebrew shop there in Southern California that we frequented, and kind of got me started with the basics of the plastic buckets and those accessories. And I had one of the old copies of The Joy of Home Brewing, and mostly got my recipes out of there. But it was by myself. This friend of mine and I didn't even brew together. So it was just stovetop, was being bold with 5 gallons and, bottling everything, dumpster diving sometimes to get bottles back when you couldn't buy those. But that's what kind of got me started. I did it, for 5 or 6 years. And then as our sons got older and busier with different activities, and I got busier with with work and deploying and things like that, I probably put a pause on it back in around 2001, and still moved around the country with my gear. But then fast forward to 2014 and living here in Northern Virginia, and having our neighbors, Jimmy Cribb, who he got us started with brewing again. He bought one of the basic kits, and he knew just through our socializing regularly that I'd previously done home brewing. We got started and included our other neighbor, Vince Gibson, and Tom Latimus. And so, 4 horsemen got going brewing together and really started with the basics, the box kits that still exists, the dry malt extract, liquid malt extract, pretty simple recipes, and we kind of evolved it over the years. In 10 years doing brew in the bag, and then now we're pretty much all grain all the time.
Right, and you have 184.
As of today, because we're brewing 2 as we speak. Will be 184 brews.
184 brews.
So it comes out to be about, a brew every month to 6 weeks. So most of the time we're doing it as a group. Sometimes it's down to 2. Very rarely is it just one of us that is pulling it off. But obviously we all have our different lives and priorities. So sometimes we can't get the whole gang together. And of course, Jimmy abandoned us, moving back to Wilmington. So we can't rely on him anymore unless he's a guest like he is today. But it's a good history. I think it's bonded us more, as friends. It's just a great kind of social activity.
Yeah, because it is a big social activity for you folks. I mean, like today, you've got the tents up, the tables, the food's brought. Everybody's getting involved. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an effort. we know just based on, our trend and timing, it's about a 5-hour day from prep to clean up. But we usually have food. Sometimes we have ball games in the background, music, whatever. So it's not all business. I mean, we're all about making good quality beer, and most of the time we're very successful at that. But I think probably the most important aspect of it is just being together, and having fun and trying something new.
184 brews. So is there a favorite recipe you have or a favorite style?
So I think, across our group, I think we would agree we're hop heads, so absent another thought, another idea, we'll usually invariably go to an IPA of some sort. And, I know there's some purists out there that maybe are not fans of the New England style, but we embraced that years ago and have had some success with that. But we'll go traditional, other hoppy beers as well. But where we've also had success, and one of my more favorites is making the a bourbon barrel stout, that requires some more additions, some more aging, soaking the oak chips or the oak spirals in the bourbon. We haven't yet tried the actual, bourbon barrel itself. Someday we will. But, you start adding some chocolate and coffee and things like that, and then aging that for 6 or 8 months. If we're planning well enough, it might be ready holidays, winter time frame. But for me personally, that's one of my favorites, and we've probably made that maybe 3 or 4 times over the years. It's we've had some success doing the barley wine. So some of those large, big ABV, big effort kind of production types of beers in the past.
I've seen the Bible that with all of the Old and New Testament, right, with all the different brew recipes and stuff that you've done in the past. But how do you approach? Because you mentioned that you used to, get the recipes out from the different books that you had and stuff. But how do you approach recipe development? What factors your influence in hops and malt and even yeast?
It's a balance. We have done a combination, I think, of building our own using the kind of the typical software options out there, the Beersmith or the Brewer's Friend, to kind of create something from scratch. So we've had some success with that. We've got, between the 3 and 4 of us, we've been gifted books, that have recipes and techniques in them. So some of the recipes come from there. We use, we go to AHA sometimes where there's some award-winning recipes that they post in there that, win the gold medals and things like that in the National Homebrew Competition. And then, this is kind of a recommendation for other home brewers out there if you haven't tried this, but, if there's beers that you like at, one of your favorite, craft brewers locally, ask them if they'll share the recipe. We've had some success doing that here locally to Virginia, but also down in Wilmington, and they'll even scale it down for you to 5 gallons or whatever. And some of our, again, more favorite craft breweries have had some success doing their, I guess you could call it, clones. So it's been kind of a balance. As far as the hop, the ingredients, one thing that I've noticed since when I started almost 30 years ago, even with gaps, is the choices of especially hops and yeast. I mean, it's almost overwhelming. But from the traditional, back in the day when I started, those, I guess they call it the C-class hops, the Columbus, the Centennial. I'm probably missing a few of them in there, but that kind of Northwest Pacific hop to the New Zealand style now, and then it's almost hard to mess up a beer if you're brewing with Mosaic, Citra, some of those real kind of tropical stone fruit type of hops. And I have to say that those are favorites, those latter ones that I mentioned in our group. So, it's where we get into more of the IPAs and some of those New England style, not exclusively, but, yeah, so it just kind of depends on the style, obviously. These beers that we're making today, there may be more old style, more English, German, style hops, and, including this German Pilsner that we have on tap right now. So it's really a combination, but I know homebrewers, that are watching this have been doing this for a while. Every time you turn around, there's a new hop, and so sometimes you get excited about, okay, what can I make with that, and start doing that research. So
Over the years of going through this, and a lot of time, what challenges have you come across, and how do you get around them? I mean, as a home brewer.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, just kind of evolving our equipment for one thing, trying to determine, when is that time when we need to transition from, again, the good old, buckets and, a single brew pot and things like that. And when are we kind of comfortable and ready to kind of take our sort of capability to the next step? And I will say we're not, we don't have electric brew system. Part of the social aspect of this is doing it outside. So we're still using the burners, the pots, and hand transferring hot liquor and wort and things like that. And so I think it's just sort of figuring out what's next. What are we ready for as a group? Because we're not really interested in spending our retirement funds on this hobby, but I think we've still kind of gradually stair-stepped our equipment and things of that nature over time, to kind of help us be more efficient, better, more efficient brewers.
Yeah.
So I think that's maybe a good example.
Do you have any favorite techniques or equipment hacks that you might pass along?
So one that we're still using, and I don't think this is a new hack, but we converted one of those Igloo cylindrical coolers years ago, and even with other options that we have for mash tuns, that is still our staple piece of equipment in terms of mashing and sparging. Probably time that we retire it and build a new one or move on to something else. But that is, there are so many different instructions out there on the web, to sort of suggest the parts list and things like that. It's an easy build. It's probably cheaper in some cases than buying some of the pre-made, equipment that's out there. Not suggesting that other equipment isn't good, but there's something fun too about building your own and then making it work. And we have, I don't even know how many beers we've made with that mash tun as an example, but it's still going strong. We're using it today, but it's probably time we retire it and make a new one.
Okay, I'm not going to talk about the two beers that you're making today. Okay, but you mentioned it. The one that you have on tap, is that a German hoppy Pilsner?
Yeah, German Pilsner.
Okay, what inspired that? Because that's I had some of that, and it's it's different than most Pilsners I've had. It's very good. What was your inspiration?
So I think the weather. We're transitioning in the summertime. We were preparing for this day of brewing together and something to sip. It's being a lager base, a little bit non-traditional. We've had some success doing lagers in the past, but we don't have a chamber to control the temperature. like you need to necessarily for lagering. So, did some research a couple of years ago when we first started exploring lagers. It's like, hey, can we make lagers with a little bit warmer temperatures? Sure enough, a experienced, enthusiastic brewer out there had some suggestions and some techniques, including the yeast and target temperatures. Summertime in my house, when I'm running my air condition, my basement, you could hang meat in, and it works well for lagering. And so, but still in the 60s, but using a more robust yeast that can handle that temperature range. So anyway, long story short, that's what led to this one. It had been a while since we'd made a style like that. This was a kind of a quicker turnaround, so it's probably not set up optimally yet, but we wanted it to be ready for today. So, folks are drinking it, and seems to be working.
Okay, how about experimentation? What role does that play in your brewing process, and how do you balance tradition with innovation?
Yeah, another good question. I don't know that we stray from tradition too often. I mean, I think you could argue as home brewing has evolved, a lot of things are non-traditional anymore in terms of especially different styles. When you talk about IPAs, for example, there's New England style, there's West Coast style. Now I think I'm hearing about a Midwest style or something like that. So who knows? I think it really ultimately comes down to, what do you like to drink? What do you like to make? What do your friends, like to drink, and what appeals to you? And then obviously you can be inspired by, let's be experimental, to your point, and try something different that we haven't made before. I think since we started home brewing together, not only have our palates expanded in terms of the styles of beers that we like, but it's kind of coincided with what we're willing to try in terms of brewing, something that we haven't done before. So I think still the sky's the limit. We're not fans of sours, however, so I don't necessarily see us diving into that. But we have, paused to do something like, hard ciders and hoppy ciders and, honey mead and things of that nature. So just to kind of break things up a little bit, maybe have a couple of those kind of unique choices in the kegerator.
184 brews. They can't all have gone flawlessly. Do you have any memorable brewing disaster or funny mishap you've experienced?
Well, I'll tell you, and I know this isn't a common practice amongst homebrewers, because we're also in a homebrew club, but we tend to, at a certain point in our brew day, to start to drink a little bit. Perfect world is you're drinking your homebrew while you're making homebrew, right? And so that's happened before, and maybe got a little excessive where I can give you 3 quick examples. One was years ago, we were using the conical fermenter, and we were done. We had cooled it down, and we were transferring the fermenter into one of our colleagues' houses, to sit and ferment. And folks that have used those before, you've got the carrying strap. It's a 2-person effort, and then you set it in the rack. So I was supervising 2 of my colleagues, and we might have been drinking a little bit towards the end there, and the thing flipped upside down. We were able to quickly right it, but once we righted it, we paused in the driveway and said, "Hey, did we add the yeast?" And we had not. So, it was almost, appropriate timing that we almost dropped this thing in the driveway to go back and add the yeast. So that's one quick one. One of the early brews, we discovered that hops are toxic to dogs, as it turns out, and got a little sloppy in terms of pouring the pellet hops out of the bag. Some fell on the garage floor. Dog got a hold of them and got very sick. Didn't die, fortunately. Went to the vet, but Jimmy's dog, Gracie, that became Gracie's ailing ale, or the $600 ale, because that was the vet bill. And then the third one was a leg burn backing up into one of the burners. I still have a scar on my calf that looks like the state of Alabama. So all of those may or may not have evolved, a little bit of drinking while we're brewing. But to your question, of all those brews, I can only think of a few that we just, our motto is just drink through it, depending on how it turns out. There's only been a few, one hand, if that we've had to just get rid of, that were just simply not drinkable. So some good success.
All right. So speaking of success, I'm going to throw one at you here, a little curveball. You have entered into a lot of contests and have won some awards. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mentioned we're in a homebrew club, so that usually involves some just more close-knit competition. So we've had some success there with some great brewers as well. And I will say that we've learned a lot from our colleagues in the brew club. Shout out Warthogs, been around since 1992. But we've also entered some, Northern Virginia, DC area has a lot of craft breweries, a lot of home brewers. So we've entered some local competitions and done well with, more in the silver, bronze medal area. I think we got a silver with a sweet stout and a porter in the past, and we've done the national homebrew competition as well. Not as successful, but have at least gotten some, not the podium level, but the certificates of recognition. Kind of thanks for playing. It didn't quite hit the level, but
yeah.
it was quality, and not to the level of every kid gets a trophy kind of thing.
Yeah. So speaking of the Warthogs, last year you guys did a collaboration with one of the local breweries.
That's right. Yeah, the brewery we were celebrating, or our brew club was celebrating our 30-year anniversary, and so our host craft brewery, Dynasty Brewing in Ashburn, Virginia, hosted us to do a collaboration brew on their, I think it's a 15-barrel system, and it was a hoppy Pilsner. Again, first time I had heard of that style, and we a little bit different than what we've got here on tap, where this is more of a German Pilsner. This was really, I'll say, more Americanized.
Yeah.
It was a Pilsner base, but American hops. Simcoe, Citra, Mosaic, and that kind of stuff. Turned out excellent. You had some.
I did, and I got to tell you, that was one of the best beers I've had, most memorable, and that's just not my opinion, because I have some information that kind of went very quickly when they had canned it. They had it on kegs, but it was going out the door fast.
It sure was.
Yeah. So congratulations on that one.
Yeah, it was fun.
What advice would you have for someone who's just getting started in home brewing?
So a couple things, or maybe a few things. One is, if your area wherever you live has a local homebrew shop, they can be maybe the best resource to help you get started, including the basics of equipment, and can just be a continuing resource of advice and support, in your continuing journey as a home brewer. And, most of the time they're going to be, the source for ingredients, again, equipment, upgrades, things of that nature, and can really be a friend to you in terms of that journey. The other thing is, if you can affiliate with a local homebrew club. I think, looking back in the years that we have been involved in our local brew club probably helped up our game, in terms of the types of techniques and equipment that we've used, and the quality of our beers. Is we just sort of share experiences, and we get maybe someone that has a little bit more of experience in picking out off flavors and what may have caused an off flavor to help us make a tweak, make a change in terms of that next attempt. But there's certainly a good social aspect of that as well, that I think is helpful. And then the other thing is, don't be afraid to dive right into maybe some of the more complex, arguably complex brewing, which would be, full all grain. It's not that complex. It's not that sophisticated, but, I mentioned before, we started off with the box kits and then some brew in the bag. And I think a lot of folks, use brew in the bag as kind of their primary way of brewing. And that's a great way to do it as well. But all of those work, and they're all great. I don't think you necessarily have to feel like you're forced to, try different things and figure out what works for you. We've got, fellow brewers that live in, one bedroom apartment, and they do stovetop and, scale it down to 2 or 3 gallons and make great beer, and, we've talked about how we do our thing outside and so forth. And then you've got folks that do the electric, a little bit more sophisticated system. So it's just kind of whatever works for you. The other thing I would say is there aren't any real rules to home brewing other than, keeping your equipment sanitized, clean throughout the whole process. Water quality is obviously important, whether it's coming out of your tap or you're buying spring water. The yeast that you use, and then temperature control. Any one of those things or a combination can ruin the beer. All the other, to me, in our experience, anything else in the process is kind of technique and preference. And, there may be purist homebrewers out there that would argue with me, but I think those big 4 that I mentioned are key. And then everything else you can kind of adapt to, whether it be how long you brew, your wort or boil your wort, to, how long you're fermenting and keeping the beer in the fermentation vessel before you package it. Whatever those things are, sometimes it depends on the style, but, we make adjustments along the way, and, I wouldn't say break rules, but try a little bit of something different. And usually it's a success, or it doesn't make that much of a difference one way or the other. So,
final question: how has home brewing affected you personally outside of the brewing experience?
So I mentioned the fact that, our experience within Evening Shade Brewery is almost always a social gathering. And that's really foundational to I think why we do this. And, for me, for my family, we got used to, in the Navy career, moving around a lot and never really having a lot of time to develop very good relationships with friends and neighbors. Here, in this neighborhood, those relationships started first before the brewing, but, in a lot of ways, we bonded differently and more strongly with the neighbors and friends that we have here next door and on our pipe stem. And that we had that as a foundation first before we started home brewing, and the brewing and the socializing with our sharing our beer, I think only enhanced that, amongst other things. It's not just surrounded by, beer and alcohol, but I think that's kind of where things started. And, we're all out here today brewing a couple beers, and it's the same group, and bringing back some legacy members of ESB and friends. I mean, that's really what's most important. We don't take ourselves so seriously that we don't forget that, the reason that we do this is because we have fun and we like each other's company.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you for taking time to join us today. And let's go drink some beer.
You bet. Thank you.